How's it going, David? Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, of course. Yeah, good to be here.
So today we're talking about building impact networks. Is that right?
That is right. Exactly.
Awesome. So we heard a little bit about impact networks from the SCURF team, but I'm definitely excited to hear more about it. I think it really defines some of the paths and structures that a lot of us use, but might not have the right words for it. So
Yeah.
excited to hear what you tell us. Please introduce
Yeah,
yourself to people and feel free to hop into your presentation.
for sure. Yeah, I love what Scurf is doing with their decentralized research centers concept. A lot of overlap and a lot of overlap here between, I'm going to talk about with impact networks and DAOs generally. I see DAOs as networks, like a combination of an organization and a community. It's all about how can we organize and coordinate better in ways that are decentralized and when leadership is distributed, when decision making is distributed. Um, and a little bit of background on me, and then I'll share a little bit of what I've learned through this work. I, about 15 years ago, was working in a nonprofit organization here in Seattle area where I live, and they're doing awesome work. They're still around. They help people without shelter to get trained in and get jobs in the food industry. And but when I was there, I was noticing how that they were working in this massive broken system, that they were kind of addressing the symptoms of a city where there's just chronic homelessness, lack of affordable housing. And I started getting really curious about how we could work across organizations, not just within a given organization, but across sectors to address complex issues that we can't solve on our own. And so that led me to Fresno, California, where I was a founding coordinator for a network that brought together 48 different leaders and different organizations across all the different sectors: public sector, private sector, nonprofits, academic institutions, to figure out ways that they could revitalize their city together. And then the next one I helped build was around a large landscape, 500,000 acres. And how do you steward a large landscape like the Santa Cruz Mountains region or any large landscape? You can't just deal with your own parcel of land, because if you get rid of the invasive species on your own parcel and your neighbor hasn't done the same, it doesn't really matter. So you have to think systemically, and we have to coordinate across these different jurisdictional boundaries. So in that case, what's called the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network, also still around today, bringing together government agencies, state, federal, local agencies, academic institutions, also private landowners and timber companies and tribal groups and land trusts to figure out where they agree, their shared care for the land as a whole. Also, a lot of places they disagreed, lots of distrust. The timber company and the environmental organization like actively fighting with one another. But if you dig deep enough, there's also a lot of common ground, and there's ways that we can strengthen our ability to share information, to share resources, coordinate across large scales. And one of the things that network did was recognize that they could pool their different data sources together to create this massive region-wide vegetation map that would reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfire, which was an issue for everybody, regardless of their specific beliefs on different things. And a big chunk of the group also noticed that the permitting processes for environmental restoration work are basically the same as for building a condo. And so collectively, they brought it to the state. Now it's a major statewide initiative called Cutting Green Tape to kind of reduce burdensome and overly complicated and costly permitting processes for just important like creek bed restoration. So long story short, I founded it Converge in 2013 with the hope of spreading this type of work. Since then, we've worked with over 50 different issue areas. We're purpose driven. Every network is really different in terms of who's involved and how they what they're focused on, but also there's really so much that's similar in terms of how they begin and type of leadership that's required, and how we can work in these decentralized ways. And so wrote a book around that called Impact Networks, which came out last October. And as I was finishing writing the book, one of my Converge co-founders, Zach Anderson, was contributing to Yearn and then co-founded Coordinate. And so I was following what was happening there, and I was been tracking the emergence of DAOs, and was really interested by them and their potential, because it's so aligned with the work that I've been doing for the last 10 years. Again, I see DAOs as forms of networks, and impact networks are a combination, just like DAOs, of an organization and a community. So, with that, want to share in this time together some of the key things that I've learned, and how to build impact networks, how to bring people together when there's not a single boss, when people aren't required to be in a certain role in an organization, when people aren't even required to contribute to that organization, but they join for the shared interest, or the connections that they have, or to get something out of it for them. How do we organize in these decentralized ways? Well, this what I'll share here is really lessons from this other field, where this has been happening for a long time, and it really builds on lessons also from social movements and community organizing and community building, because I think with DAOs we can look at those other lessons. Me personally, I've been working now in Web3 for the past year. I helped start and have coordinated a network of DAOs called Groundwork, and we'll be launching a new DAO called Gather in the months ahead, which is all about how we can gather more intentionally in person and kind of upend the existing conference industry that I think could just be so much better, and we could have much more transformative types of gatherings than we usually have. So, but in any case, let me start here with a quick 1-minute video that kind of sets the stage for this work.
I'm not hearing it.
No audio?
No audio.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll just forget that. But you can check out this at converge.net/film. There's a documentary there. But let me just go on to the deck then. So, I mean, the headline here is that we live in this incredibly complex world, right? But this complexity is actually increasing rapidly. And we know that we have to work together in unprecedented ways at unprecedented scales, but we're usually pretty bad at that. We know to address systemic issues, we have to work systemically, and that means working across organizations and across sectors. But so often we're still just primarily focused on what's happening within a given organization or within our silo, and we're really fragmented. People in organizations embark on collaborative efforts all the time, thinking they know how to do that, but so often we're frustrated by the results. There's a term out there called collaboration fatigue, which I'm sure many DAOs have experienced. Collaborating is just really hard, and it's really painful a lot of the times. And I think that's often because people go about it all wrong. Either we're trying to structure these collaborations like we would an organization, or as a hierarchy, with some central authority guiding the work and people fitting into specific roles to move it forward, or we try to plan it all out in advance, identifying really specific, measurable outcomes for the effort before people have even had a chance to get together and bring their different perspectives together and kind of identify what we can and want to do together. And a deliberate approach is really effective if we already know what needs to be done and how to do it. So hierarchies are really good when we have, we're trying to build a bridge from point A to point B, so to speak. When we know how we want to organize and we have a really specific measurable outcome we're trying to achieve, hierarchies work really well. But when we're trying to address really complex issues are experienced really differently by different people. People are affected by these issues in different ways. They'll see them really differently depending on where they stand. So when it comes to complexity, we can't plan it all out in advance. Instead, we need to bring different actors together, bring different people together to make sense of the issue, to strengthen their ability to share information and resources, to coordinate their work, and then to collaborate together in ways that affect the whole system. And that's really what it means to build a network. And of course, people have always formed networks. This is what I spoke to earlier. We've always worked in community with others to solve challenges that we can't on our own. And so in many ways, I'm really talking about a return to the ways that we've naturally connected with one another for as long as we've been around, in community, in relationship, really calling for an unlearning of the top-down command and control model that's been imposed on so much of the world. And we can build on lessons from social movements and community building and indigenous wisdom and the generations of people who have worked in these ways for thousands of years. But then we can also incorporate new lessons from network science and systems thinking and technologies and tools that help us coordinate at larger and larger scales, which I think DAOs are bringing a lot of those in. And what does it ultimately come down to? Is this Meg Wheatley quote I love, which is, "The world doesn't change one person at a time. It changes as networks of relationships form among people who discover they share a common cause and a vision for what's possible." That's what I think this is all about. Instead of telling people what to do, we can find where the energy is, and we can foster connection and learning and action around that shared purpose, which are what impact networks are all about. It's what the book is all about. What are networks? Networks, at their most basic, are just webs of relationships connecting people or things. So there are all different kinds of networks, of course. There are neural networks in our brains. There are technological networks like the physical network of routers and cables that make up the internet. There's mycelial networks that connect trees and plants together, transferring water, carbon, nitrogen, other nutrients and minerals between them underneath the forest floor. And we all know about social networks. But what many people don't realize is that networks can be deliberately organized and stewarded to do so much more than just create connection, as in social networks. We can actually create networks for learning and collaborative action around a shared purpose. That's how I define impact networks. And there are all different kinds of examples out there of these networks that are really doing some amazing things. There's just a few. The REAMP network is a collection of more than 140 organizations and foundations working across sectors to reduce carbon emissions across the Midwest. They've had huge success in shutting down existing coal plants, stopping all new coal plants from being built, passing energy efficiency policies, transportation efficiency, et cetera. There's the Justice in Motion Defender Network, which connects human rights organizations across Central America to protect migrant rights across borders. 100K in 10 has brought together more than 300 different groups to train and support 100,000 STEM teachers in 10 years. They just reached their goal last year. So many others that we can really learn from their examples. And often how they form is something like this. And I think this is similar to DAOs as well. Again, so much here, there's overlap. Often people are starting their work in scattered fragments. We're relatively siloed. Some people and organizations are working together, but as a whole, the system as itself is pretty fragmented. Not that much information flowing between different clusters of activity or different sectors or whatever it might be. And so the important first step is for some group to see the opportunity to foster greater collaboration in a more deliberate way and to find what's a shared issue or shared purpose or shared intentions that would connect people together. But really importantly, we need to move beyond this hub and spoke stage. So it's not just dependent on that centralized entity to connect people together, but instead evolving into a multi-hub network where information and resources are flowing from person to person, organization to organization without having to go through that central hub. And then over time, these networks proliferate. This is what a lot of DAOs, I think, might look like, where there's a strong core of active members and then a much larger periphery of people who are somewhat engaged. And there's really a kind of a 20-40-40 ratio I've seen really consistently across different communities and networks like this, where about 20% of people at any given time in a network are engaged. They're following, they're showing up at the town halls or the gatherings. They're active in Discord, Telegram, whatever it is. That's about 20%. And about 40% of people are sometimes active, often not, but they're, for the most part, tracking what's happening, they're engaged here and there. And then another 40% of people are kind of MIA. And technically maybe they're in the Discord, but they're not really doing anything. That's totally normal. And the goal is not to get 100% engagement at all times. It's really to foster that strong core, kind of create a hot burning sun that draws people in, and then over time engage the people who are in that kind of second semicircle or second concentric circle, 40%, engaging them where they can fit in, where they can contribute, and creating really just this vibrant ecosystem of connection and coordination. Just to double down on a point I made earlier, we really need to move beyond that hub and spoke stage that you see on the right, because that's just another form of hierarchy. These two diagrams are structurally equivalent, and being near the top of a hierarchy or the center of a rigid hub and spoke network has its benefits. You're in control, you're needed, but that's a double-edged sword. The more you're in control, less people are able to self-organize on their own. The more you're needed, the less resilient the system is in the event you're unavailable. So when we're building networks, we're trying to go beyond that hub and spoke stage into really more of a much more vibrant network. And again, hierarchies are not inherently bad or worse than networks. Hierarchies are really good at what they do best. Great ability to accomplish specific and well-defined goals, producing goods and services. And so we can see the intersection between hierarchies and networks. And in impact networks, there are different hierarchies, more like hierarchies, but hierarchies based on kind of experience and influence and that naturally form. So not power hierarchies that are dictated on top of the system, but hierarchies that naturally form from the people within it. And also in any hierarchical organization, there's always networks of people who are talking and working together in ways that are a lot different than the org chart. So we can find this intersection, integration of both hierarchies and networks where it's appropriate. There's some key mindset shifts, though, that it comes to engaging in networks. It's really different than hierarchies. We don't all need to be in the same boat, rowing at the same speed, getting the exact same place at the same time. It's more like creating a flotilla of kayaks where each person is autonomous and free to explore different channels and adjust course and accommodate their own circumstances and needs. But we're also staying in communication and notifying each other about what we're seeing and sensing and interested in exploring, and finding collaborators when it makes sense. Another distinction here, another metaphor, building networks, it's not like building a bridge. There's not a point A to point B. We can't plan it out to exact specifications. I think building impact networks and building DAOs is more like cultivating a garden. No two gardens are exactly the same. Every plant grows in relationship with its neighbors and the soil. And we can't grow gardens overnight, but we can provide nutrients and water and sunlight. We can provide some degree of structure, like stakes and trellises that plants can grab onto as they grow. We can lay a path through the garden that others can follow. We also know if we impose our influence too much on nature, if we walk in the plants or water too much, we might mess things up. So we can't control the garden, but we can support it and cultivate it. And networks are living systems, so they draw on lessons from how nature works. And like this murmuration of starlings, they change shape, they adapt in real time. They're made up of individual entities, but the whole system stays connected through communication, and something emerges that's greater than the sum of the parts. And importantly, here too, you see different clusters of birds are kind of splitting off and gathering together. You could imagine in a network or a DAO, it's totally great and appropriate for different subgroups to split off and kind of focus on a particular issue or topic or project together. We don't all need to do one thing. We don't all need to even agree on the right thing to do. As long as we're staying connected, there's a sense of coherence and creating something greater than we can do alone. And there's a key shift here, another mindset shift. Often we move forward in the world with ourselves or our organizations or DAOs at the center of our focus. And we see all the other stakeholders around us that we could collaborate with to further our own mission. The shift here, though, is to identify what's that common purpose or shared issue that I care about, that my organization and DAO cares about, that other groups also care about. And the shift here is to see yourself not at the center of that universe, but as one star in this huge and diverse constellation. Right? So rather than putting yourself, your organization at the center of your focus all the time, try putting that shared issue at the center. And then the work is to strengthen the connections between those different groups, strengthen our ability to learn from one another, to share resources, to coordinate the things that we're already doing, and then to collaborate in new ways. And that's really what it means to build a network. 5 core activities that keep showing up over and over in all the networks that I've worked with: clarifying purpose and principles, convening the people, cultivating trust, coordinating actions, and collaborating for systems change. Just to walk through each one briefly, purpose is often why people join. They come together for a specific reason. Impact networks can't be controlled, but they can be oriented around a shared purpose. And then as we clarify that purpose, we can also articulate shared principles, which are more than values. Values are what we hold as important, but principles are actually how we're going to put those values into action. When we're making decisions, when we're moving forward on something, taking actions, what are the principles that we can turn to, and we can hold ourselves accountable to what we said was important. So principles and purpose really create this foundation for vibrant and also coherent self-organization. And then convening is so important. Really, every successful network I've seen takes the act of convening really seriously, which is bringing the whole group together at the same time, in person or virtually, but making it really a priority to have these moments where the whole system comes together, to build relationships, to identify and understand what's happening, to build on the things that are already happening, to learn from those and our past experiences, and then to identify new points of leverage that we could take action on going forward and to start to organize for the next season. Convening people doesn't mean inviting them into your thing when you're building a network like this or a DAO. I would say it's really about inviting them into co-creating what's possible now that they're part of the group. So really inviting them into that shared leadership. And then we have to build trust. I really believe in this a lot. In Web3, we're building a lot of trustless systems, which are also important. But I also think, when it comes to working with other people, community matters and relationships matter. People really collaborate more on relationships than they do on issues. So that means taking the time to actually understand who each other is. We can stay anonymous, and we don't even need to reveal personal identifying details, but we can still share kind of our underlying motivations of why we're here, what we care about, the things that have influenced us, the people who have motivated us, whatever it is. But we can actually connect as humans, and not just as our job title or representatives of a particular organization. And the reason we do that is not so we like each other. We actually don't need to like each other to work together. And it's definitely not so we agree. It's actually so that we can disagree, and so that we can hold the tension through the inevitable conflicts that we're going to face in collaboration that always will come up. And so we can hang in there long enough until we can either find a slice of common ground where we do agree and we can work on that thing as a basis for our work, or we can at least have a shared understanding of each other's perspectives. We can actually listen instead of just listening to respond, really listening to understand. As we do those, we'll see the actions become coordinated more and more, that stronger flows of information and knowledge of resources growing across the network. And you can see, if you do some social network analysis, you can actually see this through these maps. This is a network that I helped build in New York City about economic mobility. This map was taken before the first convening. The circles are the individuals. They're representing their organizations in the network, about 50 of them. The colors are different sectors. And the connecting line in this case is regular flows of communication between them. And so this is before the first time they got together. Then over the next year, you can see more connected, identified new people to come in. The purple sector wasn't there before. And then over the next year, now we have that dense core periphery structure that we're looking for. Information, resources flowing person to person across the network without having to go through centralized entity. Right? Mapping is also really helpful to identify points of potential weakness or fragility in the network. I won't go into this too much in the interest of time, but this is a map I created for a particular network where you could see the group of dark black nodes there shown in the upper right. We're primarily connected to the network through one particular person. And so if the network lost that single person, they were also losing that connection to that entire community. So that tells us we need to create wider bridges, so it's not dependent on a single person, increase the resilience of this network. And then lastly, so in addition to building on the things we're already doing and coordinating our actions, we can also collaborate in new ways to create systems level change. And that's really about making collective sense of what's happening, bringing our different pieces of the puzzle together, and then taking action on key leverage points, places where Danella Meadows has said a small focused effort on one thing can create big changes throughout the whole system. Kind of like the example I shared before about pooling data resources for reducing catastrophic wildfire risk in the Santa Cruz Mountains region, or changing the way permitting happens. That was a focused action that really created big changes throughout the whole system. And we can do systems mapping around this too, to potentially identify those points of leverage. This is from 100K in 10. If you go to Grand Challenge, if you just search on Google for Grand Challenges 100K in 10, you'll see the process they use to develop this map and identify the kind of key points of leverage in their work to improve and increase the number of STEM teachers across the United States. Two last things that are super key for impact networks and also DAOs, which is many people assume that networks like this just happen, that people are going to self-organize spontaneously, but the truth is that only goes so far. The leadership always matters. It's just a different form of leadership than the one we see in hierarchical environments. Rather than defining rigid structures and rules, it's about nurturing this culture of trust and reciprocity. And instead of command and control, it's about connection and collaboration. Network leaders, as I call them, they're not there to tell people what to do, but really to foster self-organization and to create spaces to support people to discover what they can and want to do together. And I really believe network leaders are so often what make the difference. There's a few key leadership roles that I've seen where anyone in the network can step up to play these different roles. And I think that's a big part of distributed leadership here. People demonstrate leadership in really different ways. There's catalyzing, which is the act of actually forming the network in the first place, but also catalyzing a conversation, of starting a subgroup, moving the work forward on a particular project, catalyzing, moving forward. Facilitation, the actual act of organizing meetings and facilitating conversations so that each person's perspective is heard and it comes to some larger conclusion. Weaving is strengthening connections across the network, connecting with individual people, but also then weaving people together, creating introductions and connecting people together where there might be some mutual benefit. And then coordination, a lot of the back of the house stuff, the underlying structures that networks need, because that's the second thing. Networks do need some degree of structure. This is not total emergence and total chaos. But the key here is that networks only need a minimum viable structure, just enough to provide support like a trellis in a garden, but not too much to stifle the emergence and creativity. So that this enabling infrastructure might include things like mechanisms for forming teams or subgroups, our practices for communication and the platforms we use for that, processes for making collective decisions. I really believe in consent-based decision-making processes, participation agreements, whatever it might be. The key is that these structures develop as they're needed. We don't need to figure everything out ahead of time. We can focus on connecting, learning from one another, identifying what we can and want to do together, and building structures around that really supports our work. So that's just the summary of these key ingredients, those 5 activities, the network leadership and enabling structures. And to double down on the point, I really believe in relationships. Invest in ROR, return on relationships. Networks are all about relationships. It's what makes it all work. So if at any point you're unsure about how to proceed, that's my advice. Invest in those relationships that really make up the core of the community. For much deeper dive for more of this, take a look at the book. I think you'd find it really relevant to DAOs and kind of decentralized communities of all kinds. And then there's all kinds of resources at our website, converge.net. There's the documentary. There's a free toolkit, which has surveys and facilitation guides, evaluation tools you can use for network mapping and other stuff. And then we have some trainings and other types of content on there, but lots of free content. We try to give everything away in open source, everything we do. So that's that. I think that brings me to time. Thanks for watching and being here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. That was an awesome review of Impact Networks. I learned a ton. I think we also got kind of the next level. So learning some about the leadership ones of catalyzing, facilitating, weaving, and coordinating. I think it is a lot of stuff that kind of goes on, as you say, behind the scenes and is like a really high kind of meta of how the organizations work. So thanks for sharing some of that nomenclature and sharing the information with us. I think it'll all help us kind of recognize and be more mindful as we're making these considerations. So I took a lot of notes.
I like it.
So yeah, I take notes for everyone. I got an entire page for this one. So.
Oh shit, man! Yeah, you gotta share all those notes out from all these sessions. That'd be great. Well, thanks for doing that. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.